Welcome, everyone. We will begin the webinar on the why behind bidding structural repair. This is part one of a three-part series and will cover what estimators should know about structural, refinishing, and documenting with photos. I'm Melissa Jolls with RDA Impact. Scott Ellegood, founding partner and chief operating officer for Accountable Estimating, is your presenter today. The presentation will take approximately 40 to 50 minutes. We are recording it and we'll post it on our YouTube channel. If you have questions during the webinar, you can type them in the chat box at the bottom right of your screen, and Scott will answer them during the presentation. Now, I will turn it over to Scott.
Thank you, Melissa. Welcome, everybody. So, as she said, our first of a three-part series is the why behind bidding structural repair. I'll start off by just telling you a little bit about my background. Before becoming a founding member of Accountable Estimating just last year, I started my collision industry career as a teen, sweeping floors and washing cars in the shop, where I worked my way up to eventually becoming a master technician and also estimated within the shop. Around 2005, I entered the auto insurance and independent appraisal industries, where I was a claim representative. I also appraised and estimated damage to anything that really rolls or floats at that time. And then for a period of time, I was an independent appraiser doing that as well, and then worked for the largest insurer in the United States as a trainer for over 5 years. Now, I always like to share this because as I said, I started in my teens sweeping floors, right out of high school and during high school. But then in my 30s, I went back and I got my bachelor's degree in business administration from the University of Tennessee at Martin. And I did that in my 30s with 4 kids, a dog, a cat, a mortgage, and a full-time job. And I like to share that with everybody because what we put our minds to do, we can do. And in this industry, training is becoming one of the most important things that we can do. So here are the objectives for today's webinar. By the end, everyone will have a basic understanding of vehicle structural construction, a basic understanding of how the vehicle structure affects ADAS components, how pedestrian safety is now being built into the vehicle structure, the new need for pre- and post-structural measuring, and the methods of structural measuring for the estimating process. Since the first automobile rode off the assembly line and through the 70s and 80s, automakers used mostly mild steels to build all facets of the vehicle, including the structure. The tensile strength of steel is measured in megapascals and is shown in this abbreviation of MPa. And as we look at this graph from the 1970s, we see mild steel was really the only thing that was used. As we look towards the 1990s, that started to change because through the 80s, there were many advances in steel being developed. And by the 90s, most OEMs were using high-strength steels in vehicle construction, although at a smaller rate than what they do today. I don't know if everybody on the call uses iCar training or not, but whether you do or whether you don't, you can go to part of their website called iCar RTF, and there is a free and a subscription model to that. If you are a gold class member shop, then you can sign in and actually get deeper into the RTS system. But this is an excerpt from one of their articles from September 23rd, 2014, and it states some automakers allowed cold straightening up to 700 megapascals. That is going to come into play here in this next slide. So we look at today. Today, you can see by the graph that all types of steel, advanced high-strength steel, ultra-high-strength steel, boron steels, and other steels are being used in a large majority in the construction of the structure of vehicles. That 700 MPa line is roughly about here on the graph. And if you look at everything to the right of that line, those things are not repairable. That is very important because the heavier MPa materials are being placed into the passenger compartment area to help save lives. And it makes a big difference how things are repaired today. So let's put that into a little bit of perspective by looking at a vehicle. This is a 2018 Honda Accord. The sedan or four-door is on the left, and on the right is your coupe, two-door. Pay close attention to the area that I just circled on the left image. It states that front pillar is 1500 MPa, and it is behind a 500 or 590 MPa panel. So let's think for a minute about some typical accidents we see in the shop. A very common accident I used to see when I worked in the shop and also when I was an appraiser is a side glancing blow a lot of times, where the fender is usually destroyed and something has caught the front door and tweaked that door in such a way that there's structural misalignment both in the door and in the A pillar. Now, since that is a 590 MPa on the outside of the A pillar, that is more than likely repairable, but always refer to your vehicle-specific OEM repair procedures before making that a 100% decision among how to repair something. But that 1500 MPa panel is butt up right against it, kissing that panel. And that is what your hinges are actually attached to. Now think about this. How does this matter when I'm estimating? Shouldn't the technician just worry about this? Not really, because if we look at our OEM procedures to start with, before we start estimating, we know that this is a 1500 MA panel in this area that is likely damaged. Then as an estimator, we can use that knowledge to decide, can this be repaired and what method it must be repaired? And that alone may make the difference of whether or not this is a total loss early in the process or later in the process. And that can mean a happy or unhappy customer and sometimes thousands of dollars. So some basic construction of the frame in our passenger vehicles we have today. So what we have here is a unibody frame vehicle. So passenger cars are built with unibody frame construction. Unibody is a single form chassis vehicle where the unibody consists of many parts fastened together through various means, such as welding, rivet bonding, adhesive bonding, and/or bolting. On today's vehicles, OEMs are using a combination of these fastening techniques and always follow the OEM repair procedures when repairing the structure. If the OEM says it has to be welded, you should weld it in the exact fashion they say. If they say it's adhesive bonding, great. If they say either or, be sure to document that with photos with the actual OEM procedure. Save that to the file, because OEM procedures can change sometimes weekly, monthly, and possibly yearly. But that date and time you made that decision is very important. So next you have full frame vehicles, which is basically a unibody over frame. The suspension and drivetrain are attached to the frame, and the unibody structure is then attached to the frame also. Most passenger trucks and SUVs are unibody over full frame vehicles. If you have damage to both the frame and the unibody, you may need to think about the repair process as separate. Now let me pause there for a minute, because in the past, you really didn't. For many years, part of my master technician, I was a frame technician. I actually found this part of the work more satisfying. I really enjoyed doing this work. And I can tell you the setup of either a unibody or a full frame vehicle is one of the most important steps in actually repairing that frame. If you do not set it up correctly, you cannot pull it and can't correct it. And even with trucks, up until more of the modern era of the way cars are constructed with so many different types of substrates now, you really just held this box frame, this full frame, and then did your pulling. But now with aluminum body vehicles and different substrates in there, many manufacturers are suggesting that you actually hold these two things separately. For instance, if you had damage to the door area on the left side, and you had damage to the rocker panel, so we have unibody damage, but it hit it so hard that the frame had a bend in it, the manufacturer may or may not recommend that you actually set these up separately and pull them separately, and in many instances, disconnect the body from the frame when you make these corrections. That's something that's really changed over the years. And it's not a thing that is necessarily opinion anymore. It's fact, because the manufacturer has a body manual on how to repair that specific year, make, and model. And just for a fun fact, the last passenger car that was actually produced with a unibody over full frame was in 2011 by Ford, and it was the Crown Victoria. So how does the structure affect ADAS systems? In order to understand that, we need to look at the alignment, and more specifically, the thrust alignment. So it all starts with this four-wheel alignment, specifically the rear wheels. The thrust line is an imaginary line drawn perpendicular to the rear axle center line, and that's what is illustrated here on the screen. It confirms the rear axle is parallel to the front axle, and the wheelbase measurements are equal on both sides. Hunter Engineering has a lot of great videos that explain alignments and calibrations on YouTube. So I suggest you guys go out and check that out, because alignments are not just alignments anymore. They're calibration exercises. And this is a way that you can, that tells your car where the vehicle exists in time and space. Think about it for a moment. How do all these neat systems we have that park the car, that brake for us, that adjust our cruise control, that keep us in the lane, how in the world does that work? Well, something has to tell the computer and onboard sensors where your place in time is relative to everything else. And in order to do that, those computers need to understand where the vehicle is physically. This thrust line helps them center that and zero that. So next, it moves us to the steering angle sensor. The steering angle sensor measures the steering wheel position, angle, and rate of turn. You can see in this illustration, it is still showing the thrust alignment, how it is straight, how it is parallel. The steering angle sensor is being aligned off those front wheels in their alignment to the rear thrust alignment. So the thrust alignment informs the front wheels. The front wheels informs the 0-point calibration of the steering angle sensor. In turn, the ADAS systems and onboard computers use that 0-point calibration of the steering angle system to determine how far away you are from an object, where an object is relative to you, coming up behind you, like with blind spot detection, and a whole host of other ADAS components. This is a popular representation of many ADAS functions. Proper collision damage assessment has always required knowledge of how a vehicle functions. When I started in the early 90s, base coat and clear coat was not the standard. Most shops sprayed a single stage enamel. Most shops wrote estimates from books and not on computers. And most repair decisions were based on opinion guided by experience and not by fact. And the way a quarter panel was replaced on a Toyota Camry was the same way we did it on a Chevy Impala. Now, vehicle structural substrate and structural fastening type dictate the repair method. That's why it's so important that you go into the OEM procedure. There is just absolutely no way that one person on earth can remember everything and everything the way it needs to be done. And just because you repaired a specific model a certain way 1 week, 1 year, doesn't mean you even do that same model the same way the next year. So it's important to always go back to the OEM procedures, because that's the fact I am referring to. When I say we had opinions, we repair by opinion guided by experience. Now we can repair by fact, which is our OEM product and other documentation like equipment. Since many ADAS systems are attached, or sensors are attached to these structural components, an understanding of various ADAS functions is required to estimate accurately. So pay attention to the areas where I've placed the pointers at the blind spot detection. I want you guys to kind of remember the range of where this is. Also, in the lower left, I highlighted the area that this is a short to medium range radar. It's important to understand that this is a radar sensor, and that's what it's doing. So this is working, to put in perspective, kind of like the radar when we watch a weather broadcast. That Doppler is going out and it's getting a return, and it's trying to find, is there something in this space? So next, how do we measure things? How are we going to measure the structure and know it's correct? How are we going to do that in the beginning of the process? How can we pre-measure? Well, the first thing we need to think about is three-dimensional measuring. Three-dimensional measuring is vital to putting sensors for the ADAS components back in the relative position they need to be in, or the exact, sorry, not relative, the exact position they should be in. So what we have in the image on the right is a blind spot detection sensor that is mounted to the quarter panel. Now, most of these on many automobiles today are mounted to the quarter panel in this general area, one on each side of the vehicle, left and right. Some automobile manufacturers, such as Audi, put it in the same general location, but it's mounted to the bumper. For this illustration, we'll think about it being mounted to the quarter like it is here. Also, this area of the quarter panel is an area of the quarter panel when we wrote to repair it, or when we decided to, when we actually got into the repair, we didn't pay as much attention to it as we did the outer quarter panel, which was visible, since this was behind the bumper cover. And making it exactly perfect to the dimensions it was before was not as critical. Today, that is critical, because this blind spot detection sensor does not have a malfunction indicator lamp on the dash, and it must be calibrated. And it must be mounted to a surface that is pointed it correctly in the X, Y, and Z positions. This is a very telling statistic that actually should make shop owners scared, and understanding that you want to follow all your procedures and make sure everything is covered. Because AAA did this last year. They did a study of drivers, and in that study it said 30% of owners of vehicles with BSM, blind spot monitoring systems, reported at least sometimes relying on the system to point a change of lanes without visually checking their blind spot. So think about that. People are becoming dependent on these sensors working. I look at my mirror, it's not giving me a light or an indicator that somebody's there, so I must be able to change lanes. Now, that's 30% of people who were likely honest with their answers. There may be more that just decided not to answer that. But either way, 30 is a very big chunk of those systems, of those drivers. Also, the owner's manuals on almost all cars will also point out that the blind spot detection system does not work in certain conditions such as heavy fog, heavy rain, high speeds. So it is uncertain if the average consumer even understands that. So to bring that back to the shop, if you repair an area with this sensor and you do not post-scan and you do not confirm with a measurement that it's in the correct area and calibrated, and somebody makes a mistake, the liability of that mistake potentially could come back to the shop. So here's a visual representation of the X, Y, and Z axis as I was referring to. And I overlaid it over the area of the sensor just to get an idea. So the axis is really looking at the height, the correlation of it left and right, and also how close or far away it is. So that's why it's important to get this area correct. And even if you don't have a measuring system right now to measure that when it comes out, I am willing to bet there are some shops out there that have experiences over the last few years where they have repaired something in this area, replaced or reinstalled this sensor, send it off to have it calibrated, just to have it sent back by the dealer or someone else to say, it's not calibrating, something's wrong. And I hear it over and over again from our clients and people we interact with that, hey, I had the Lexus and I had to send it to the Lexus dealer 3 times before we got it right. Well, every time that's sent away is gross profit percentage shrinking every time. It's also people not doing other things that could be doing that. So you're removing people from production to non-production when there is ways to head that off and understand that early enough that it's correct when it gets to the assembly process and calibration process. Another big change in technology is pedestrian detection and safety systems. So December 10th, 2018, the IIHS had announced the preparations for an early 2019 release of its first report of these systems. And this graphic is an indication of how they test those systems. So what are the different the different various situations where a pedestrian can be hit. And actually, I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma, guys, and I actually heard on my news last night that pedestrian hits in the city have gone up dramatically. I don't know if there's a correlation to people being distracted or what, but for many different reasons, the manufacturers are putting these systems into our automobiles. One of those is over the last 10 years, a lot of their budgets had to be tightened because of bankruptcies and other things that have been widely publicized in the automobile manufacturing industry. So what they did is they looked at how can we create things that can be sold around the world. And a lot of these technologies have existed on the European continent for many, many years because smaller roads that are 1,000 years old, built by the Romans, they're quite more compact, and there are a lot more people walking than driving in a lot of those areas. So this has come to our country now. This is one of the things you've probably seen over the past few years that make you go, So, because I know as a technician, my first thought when I saw these is, man, that's flimsy. Why are they putting fenders on these flimsy little perches and things? And let me say this. I don't know if they're actually called perches. They're called so many different things right now, and there's not a common name for them. That's what I chose to call them. But they are there for striking a person. So think about it. If you were to get hit by a car with the front of that car, you want as much energy of that collision to be pulled away from you and directed away from you than rather through your rib cage or your pelvis or some other area. And this is what this does. This helps kind of catch the person. Now, this is one of the newest ones in America. And this is a 10-second video with no audio. I just want you to pay attention to the hood. You're going to watch, this is called the active hood technology. So what's happening is in certain conditions, when those conditions are met, that hood is being projected straight upward 4 inches in the rear in an effort to keep the pedestrian out of the windshield, because they find a large amount of bodily injury happens when a person strikes the windshield. So you couple that with fenders and those fender perches that channel collision energy away from a person's body. This is the same thing. This technology is on the 2018 Buick Regal as a standard option. And everything that I've read and can research, it will continue to be a standard option on the Buick Regal and other GM automobiles as we go forward. This technology is also on some other vehicle manufacturers as well. Another interesting note is that this technology has been on some GM cars in Europe since 2011. But here are the aspects of making this technology work. The first thing is it only works between 16 and 30 miles per hour. It has a sensing and diagnostic module that's in the passenger compartment. And then there is a sensor within the front absorber that's actually detecting the pressure change. And then we have the active hinges. So that sensor, this is an illustration from GM that shows how that sensor is mounted into the absorber or the bumper cover. And the green on each end is either end of the sensor, and this is in the middle is a clear tube. And from my understanding, it is sensing a change in the volume of air within that tube, and that's what senses everything to deploy. Now, let's take this to estimating. That 2017 Buick Regal you looked at that had needed a bumper cover and a headlight and a grille, and it's not that really big of a hit. Maybe we in the past would call that a light hit. Just became a lot more complicated. Because if you haven't been searching for OEM procedures when those light hit comes in, this is an exact reason why you want to. You need to know in the beginning what you're going to need. It's also going to change the amount of your estimate. And we always recommend that you educate yourself and educate your customer and not let the bill payer or insurance company do that education for you. You as repairers are the expert in the repair. So show that, give that, share that with the customer, share that with the insurance adjuster that comes in and wants to know why it's just a bumper and a headlight and a grill costs $4,000. This is why. Just as a tidbit, Buick sold 11,559 Regals in 2017. So the average amount of lifespan of a car kind of ranges around the 8-year mark. And usually you don't start seeing things like this in your shop for a couple years, unless it gets saturated into the market. I would not be surprised if some of you guys have already seen this, have experienced this active fluid technology, but if you haven't, it's going to come very soon. Some of you may use the Aztec device to actually scan your vehicles. And Aztec's Industry Relations Director, Jake Rodenroth, said this while addressing the CIC conference last fall. And this is an excerpt. About 30% of these repaired vehicles fail calibration because they weren't straight enough. So think about that for a minute. Almost 30% of their failed calibrations are due to structural misalignment. Now, if we take collision devices, 30-20-10 rule, and for those of you who may not be familiar with that, the 30% is the approximate amount of an estimate that should comprise of body, mechanical, and frame labor on average. That is not 30% exactly, but you could actually go to Collision Advice and Mike Anderson's training, and he could give you some more specific detail on that. Also, in his Who Paid for What surveys that come out and his studies that he puts out, we see in 2017 the national average of frame labor per estimate is less than 1%. Now, I'm not saying that an estimate should contain 30% of frame damage. What I'm saying is less than 1%. In some states, it's 0.2% on average per estimate is frame labor. So either the industry is not capturing the structural misalignment, which is indicative of the statement of 30% missing calibration, or they're bidding it in different ways, or it's not being recognized the same way. There's several things that are happening. So let's put this together. Approximately 30% of ADAS calibrations fail due to structural misalignment, and frame repair labor is bid less than 1% of estimates on average. So we have a gap. And again, I'm not saying we need to bid 30% on the estimates, but there is 30% of calibration failures. And that's just found by Aztec, who is actually doing even though they're a larger player in scanning, they're not doing a super large number of the 40,000 shops that actually exist in the United States. And they're finding that 30% rate. What that says to me, as someone who's an expert in estimating, is that as shops, we're missing something. We're not recognizing something. And there's two things that come out of that. One, are we sure we're getting everything as safe as possible? Two, we are missing revenue. And to add on to that, are your technicians finding some of this and repairing it and not even it being related back to your estimators? And if you think for a minute that couldn't be you, I will challenge you that that may not be correct, because we ask technicians to be repairers, not estimators. And sometimes we rely on them to tell us things. That's not really what we want them to do, or maybe that is not necessarily what they need to do. So how do we start to correct this gap? Well, the first thing is continuing training, what you guys are doing right now. And what we're doing right now is what I like to call the ongoing short learning opportunities. We do that every day. I remember when I was in a Votech school when I was about 18 years old, there was an older gentleman taking the same auto body course in his 50s, and he would always say to us, boys, it's OJT. That OJT is what matters, on the job training. And that does matter. That's huge. That's where you really craft your skills. And today, with technology, we can watch webinars like this. We can jump on YouTube and watch this again later, or another video. I learned how to hang cabinets in my kitchen by watching YouTube videos, but it doesn't make me a carpenter, right? Doesn't mean I have the skill set to do it. It means I have enough skills to figure it out and make myself and my wife happy. And then there's a second kind of training. There's certified and accredited training. And this is where you verify a skill set, where you can have a certificate on the wall or a diploma on the wall that says, we have verified that you understand this skill. So we need to be looking at both. We need to look and see how how is the everyday training happening amongst our people? What are they looking at? What are my estimators reading body shop business and fender bender articles and collision week articles, or are they not even looking at that? Or are they looking for YouTube opportunities to learn things? And if they are, maybe you can foster sharing that amongst yourself as an industry practice within your business. Excuse me. Another thing that's very important that we find is almost no shops are doing, except maybe some of the larger MSOs, is defining your shop's estimating processes. Define your minimum requirement. You know, when people hear that, a lot of times they feel like, oh my gosh, that is so daunting. I don't know how I'm going to do that. I suggest you start very simple. Let's start in estimating with what are the minimum types of photos do you expect and their quality. Write an outline. Use your estimators to write that outline with you. Meet together and hone that down to where everybody agrees that this is the minimum that we need. Now, I understand probably some are shaking their head and thinking, well, this VRP wants me to do this, this one wants me to do that. Fine. But stop. What does your shop want? What do you want? Don't let others define how your shop runs. Define how your shop runs. So define those processes. Start with photos and then move on from there. Maybe you can move on to when do we decide to scan, or when do we decide to pre-measure? You know, define that, because you can have 4 estimators sitting side by side and they are estimating 4 totally different ways and causing 4 different outcomes from your business when you think you have a cohesive model. Next is ask questions of the customer. Many shops have CSRs, customer service representatives, that greet the customers when they come in until an estimator or someone can actually get to them to start the estimate or set an appointment. And they're more than somebody that's answering the phone and maybe taking care of the coffee and a few other things. They can actually start this process of repair planning for you. There are many strategic questions they can ask that will actually inform the estimator and or blueprinter where to look for damage and how damage is adjacent. So ask them things like, what type of day did this wreck happen? So if they tell you, hey, it happened at 7:30 and I was taking my son to school. Well, do you happen to stop at Starbucks and get a coffee when you go? Oh yeah, I get a caramel latte, blah, 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 blah every time. But when you had the accident, did it spill? Yeah, but I cleaned that up. Well, that used to not to be a big deal, maybe a stain in the carpet or the seat, but now you have a ton of electronics running through that console. You need to look there. You need to see. What if it's a situation, ask them this question. Were you at an intersection when you were hit? Yes. So the damage, guys, would be to, let's say, to the left front corner. They're at an intersection. What lane were you in? Well, I was in the right-hand lane. Is there a curb on the street? Yes, there's a curb on the street. When you were struck from the left front corner, did it push your car into the curb? Well, yeah, it did. So now the estimator can know from that information, hey, you probably got damage to the right side wheels too and potential suspension. See, questions like that, being strategic with that, create a process out of that. That will help you get answers in the beginning instead of waiting for things to pop up and fix it. Let's head them off at the path and let's get a shorter cycle time, a happier customer. Let's get paid for what we're doing. That's our whole goal. So you've probably been thinking, once I said we need to pre and post measure, you're like, really? How am I going to do that? Well, we have the old school way, and we always say an estimator needs at least 2 or 3 tools with him at all times. And the tape measure is one of those tools. The other 2 would be a flashlight and a mirror. But here we have two-dimensional products. Well, 2 products for 2-dimensional measuring. We have a tram gauge and we have a tape measure. And what these are good for is to really see really quick, do I have a potential problem here? Do I need to get a frame technician? Do we need to do another type of measuring? And then we have ways to measure 3-dimensionally. And these are not the only 3. I will say I've not been paid by any of these guys to talk about them or anything. These are 3-dimensional measuring products that are available that you can use in the estimating bay and in some instances in the parking lot, even the customer's house. you could do this in some places. And drawing you to the picture under the matrix 1 on the left-hand side, that picture below that with those colored lines is actual measurements within the pictures that are taken from their tool. And those are measurements that you can choose to measure from at any time, even given point. At the time you confirm in the beginning, you can actually come back later to the same photo and make sure you were correct. And that's also documentation that you did the measurement and what the structure was like at that position. Now, all three can give you that documentation that lets you know what the measurements of the vehicle were at that given time. And that matters for insurance payment. That matters for the situation maybe where a customer's coming back and they struck some of those great, lovely potholes that everybody has in their cities and did some structural misalignment. You have proof that it was aligned when it left your shop. And the same thing goes if you get into a situation where you're pulled into a court for a lawsuit or something. You can prove that the vehicle was structurally straight at that time. Now, I know some are thinking, especially owners, these things are expensive. Yes, they are. But consider what they're doing and consider what you're going to do with them. If we have a gap, understanding that we're missing structural misalignment on a lot of vehicles, let's just say 30%. Let's say it was 3 out of 10. If 3 out of 10 cars come in that you can identify structural misalignment with and repair, that's more repair hours and dollars you're capturing, and you're getting a return on investment on the tool. Plus the ability to document and get paid for more through insurance companies by showing them exactly what has happened, because the visual indicators are not there anymore. If we remember back to the purchase I showed with the fenders being attached to it, some may have noticed that visual indicators such as frame or fender to hood gaps no longer show structural movement. That's because they're floating independently on those purchases. So the pedestrian safety has now made it more difficult for me to see structural misalignment. I have to measure it. So that is the end of our presentation, everyone. I will bring Melissa back and just point you to some of the information I have on the screen here. If you would write down the accountableestimating.com/RDA web address. We have a landing page specifically for RDA folks, and there is a 15% discount off all our products there. If you go there, it'll really answer a lot of questions for you. My email is here and available. Feel free to email me at any time, and that is our company phone number, and you can get to me by dialing 404 or just hitting the sales button, and it'll come straight to me, and I'd be happy to talk to anybody anytime. So with that being said, what questions do you have?
Thank you, Scott. We don't have any questions right now. I'm just going to also follow up by saying I will send everybody who's on the webinar today Scott's contact information along with those webinar addresses and links. And we do have a question. Well, nice job. You got a compliment, and you did an excellent job. And just to let everybody know, this is one of a 3-part series, and we'll be sending the information out as soon as we do have the other dates for the 2 other webinars. We have one scheduled for March 20th. Will be the second one, and then on April 24th will be the 3rd part. So be watching for that information, and we'll be in touch with all other future upcoming training opportunities. I think that's it, Scott. Just everybody saying well done and an excellent job, and we really appreciate you coming on today, and we appreciate everybody who participated.
I appreciate it, and I look forward to hearing from you and seeing everyone in the future. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.